Hello, this is Hushang Amir Ahmadi, a professor at Rutgers University and president of the American Iranian Council. In this video, I'd like to discuss U.S. relations with Iran again and bring you up to date about developments in Iran and in the U.S. that are impacting this relationship seriously. Indeed, we have been experiencing an increased tension between the two countries in recent weeks. The relation has been tense for many years, and since President Trump left the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, the tension has been increasing, but developments in recent weeks are very concerning indeed. On the Iran side, there is a change toward further radicalism in the Islamic Republic. The country's parliament has been taken over by the members of the Revolutionary Guard and radicals, revolutionaries. And they have now a speaker, Mr. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who used to be Tehran's mayor, now a speaker of the parliament, a very close person to the leader Khamenei. Ghalibaf has a Revolutionary Guard background and was supposedly not as radical as many others, and indeed his past background shows that the man was more like a centrist in many ways. But whatever that past, today he is quite a radical, speaking like a very serious radical, and obviously is coordinating this radicalism with Mr. Khamenei, the leader, the Revolutionary Guard, and other radicals in the country. Domestically, they have taken on the opposition, the liberals, and of course the corrupt officials of the current government of President Rouhani, and they are trying, the radicals in the parliament under the leadership of Mr. Ghalibaf are trying to make people understand that the change again, a radical change, is in the way, that they will not tolerate moderation, corruption, and liberalism of some sort, that they wanted to make changes. Well, it's good that they are talking about change, but unfortunately, thus far, that change has not been in the positive direction. That is, yes, fighting corruption is great, but at the same time, getting tough at the opposition at a time that the country is so split is not a good news. And more than that, a country that needs bread and butter should not be engaged in the kind of talks that this new parliament leadership is engaged in vis-a-vis foreign countries, particularly the United States. Indeed, on the foreign policy side, Mr. Ghalibaf and others with him have taken a very tough position vis-a-vis the US and more specifically President Trump. And that is indeed surprising. And that is indeed a whole new development, because generally speaking, in the past, the Islamic Republic has been very careful in personalizing its problems with the United States. Now, the radicals in the country are indeed doing exact that is personalizing their problem with Mr. Trump. Yes, Mr. Trump left the JCPOA, reimposed sanctions, and have hurt the Islamic Republic. No question about it. But at the same time, to be fair, Mr. Trump had said during his election campaign that he doesn't like the JCPOA, this nuclear deal. And after he became president, for the first year, he stayed with the deal, trying to convince Iran that it needs to renegotiate. Mr. Trump offered to negotiate comprehensively towards normalization of relation and expansion of economic ties and cooperation. That was a good start, although he made that a start after he left the JCPOA. I wish he had done it before he had left. But nonetheless, he made the offer. Before he left, he insisted on negotiation. After he left, he offered to comprehensively deal with Iran-US problems toward normalization. Iran, throughout the time that Mr. Trump, before he leaves the JCPOA, was offering to negotiate, rejected it. Iran basically said no, no, no. And then Mr. Trump left. After he left, Iran started rethinking its strategy. Originally, they thought the U.S. leaving the JCPOA is no big deal. As President Rouhani said, we were 5+1, now we are 4+1. But then in recent weeks, the three European powers, France, Germany, and Britain, also took issue with the JCPOA and Iran's renewal of its enrichment process, uranium enrichment. They advised the International Energy Atomic Agency that it should condemn Iran for the quote-unquote breach of the JCPOA. Well, the AUP, International Atomic Energy Agency's board of governors did indeed pass a resolution against Iran. So thereafter, the Islamic Republic became even more isolated. The US had left, and now the three European powers that were supposedly to stay and help Iran, they also took issue with the matter. So Iran now has a JCPOA with 1+2, the two being Russia and China, almost. The issue is this: Iran did not want to negotiate with Mr. Trump because he left the JCPOA. But now Iran, after coming under tremendous so-called maximum pressure policy of the United States, is saying, yes, I would like to negotiate, but only if Mr. Trump returns to JCPOA. Well, not a wise policy when Mr. Trump was in the JCPOA. They would not negotiate. Now that he has walked out, they want him to walk in back and negotiate. Well, Mr. Trump has said, yes, okay, we negotiate, but I cannot return to JCPOA. I will still negotiate as I am outside it. If you wanted to negotiate, you are welcome. And that's where the problem is at the moment. But Mr. Trump is also adding more ammunition to his maximum pressure policy by letting or asking the UN Security Council to extend its arms embargo on Iran, which is due to expire this October, indefinitely, extend indefinitely. Well, that's a big blow to Iran, whether Mr. Trump succeeds or not. Even the fact that the matter is raised at the UN Security Council would put tremendous pressure on Iran and is of source of concern. Now, given this background, it is not all that surprising that Mr. Ghalibaf and his colleagues in the parliament, the radicals, are basically taking a more aggressive, radical approach to the US, Mr. Trump in particular. They are loudly saying that they will not negotiate, and whoever that negotiates with Mr. Trump is a traitor. that will be punished. And also, they have taken not just a radical verbal approach, but practical approach as well, by challenging the U.S. in the waters, in the international waters, that is to say, by, for example, sending shipments of gasoline to Venezuela, defying the U.S.'s threat that it will stop it. Well, Mr. Trump did not stop that, and that's to his credit, that he stayed cool. Mr. Trump is an isolationist. He's not an interventionist. And so I believe Tehran knows that. Tehran also knows that the U.S. economy is in trouble, that coronavirus has harmed the United States, that the streets of the United States were filled with protesters recently, and that there is a serious election going on in the country, the presidential election. Tehran knows all this. And I believe Tehran is trying to take advantage of the situation, assuming that given all these problems and engagements, Mr. Trump will have no time, energy, or will to take on Iran beyond what the maximum pressure policy is doing. They certainly are counting on their assumption that the United States will not attack Iran. In fact, one of Iran's Revolutionary Guard leaders have recently said that the United States will not dare to attack militarily, that is, Iran, for two reasons. First, U.S. knows that if it starts a war with Iran, Iran will destroy, quote unquote, will destroy Israel. And that is one big concern for Mr. Trump. And the second, of course, they think that the United States is very concerned about its assets, personnel in the region. So for two main reasons, Israel and this personnel and assets in the region, they think Mr. Trump will not start a war with Iran. On top of it, as I said, Mr. Trump is facing an economy that is declining, a coronavirus that is harming, basically a class war on the streets, and a serious, tough election. But here is the problem. All of this problems, quote unquote, or engagements that Iran counts as preventive of a war between US and Iran may indeed be acting in exact the opposite way. That because the US economy is declining, the coronavirus has harmed the country, that the streets are, full of, protesters, that there is an election that is very tough, all of them may indeed be an incentive for Mr. Trump to engage Iran in a war despite the fact that the man is an isolationist. But that is not written in a holy book for Mr. Trump. Yes, he is an isolationist, but he could turn around and become an interventionist. Yes, he do not like war and did not want to interfere in other countries' affairs, as he has said many times. But then again, he could turn around and say, yes, but unfortunately, our national interest demands a different direction. In the past, this kind of redirection of policy in the country, in the United States, has happened. You have had presidents who didn't want to engage in wars, but did get engaged. I remain concerned, therefore, very concerned about the recent developments in U.S.-Iran relations. The Iran side is taking on a serious foreign policy matter, but playing with it as if it was nothing, that you can deal with it on the basis of your assumptions only, or your understanding, that ignoring what could indeed happen that could change those assumptions, that Mr. Trump, an isolationist, could become a warmonger. That is a serious problem, and I believe Iran could be miscalculating this relationship, and the fact that tensions, when they increase in a situation that we are in U.S.-Iran relations, that is, could be very seriously dangerous. I plead to both sides to be extremely careful. I believe the radicals need to tune down their rhetoric and actions. Be extremely careful. This new parliament has many things to do in the country. They really should focus in the country on the many issues facing their people: inflation, unemployment, economic recession, poverty, and you name it. This parliament must become radical in relation to those issues and tune down rhetoric against the United States, particularly at this very dangerous time when the U.S. is indeed harmed by many developments and could indeed become aggressive if it is bothered beyond reason. Now, I also think the leaders in the Islamic Republic must not get engaged in domestic American politics. Although America at times is engaged, that got involved in Iran's domestic politics in the past. But I think it is safer for Iran to stay away from American domestic politics, particularly this particular election. Unfortunately, thus far, that hasn't been the case. Indeed, these radicals in Tehran are openly saying that we will do everything in our power to make sure that Trump is not re-elected and that Mr. Biden is elected. And if he is elected, then we will hopefully negotiate with him. Well, I don't want to predict the results of the American election. It could go both ways. One thing I want Iran know is that its problem with the United States is not partisan, it is bipartisan. Iran has had problem with both parties. And I will, if I was Iran and I was a leader of the country, I would certainly make sure that the country, our politics there will have been isolated from American election. It's very dangerous. It's a very dangerous game. Just think about it. If Mr. Trump, who wants to get re-elected at any price, would even start a war, because he can basically prove to everybody that Iran is indeed interfering in American domestic affairs. That's very dangerous. Mr. Trump can use that interference in its advantage, in its own advantage during this election. Iran's engagement or interference in this domestic election indeed could backfire for the Democrats badly indeed. Just think about it, that the American people are told that this Islamic Republic likes Mr. Trump. That's not something nice. Okay, that Mr. Biden, I'm sorry, I meant to say that just think about telling the American people that the Iranian officials like Mr. Biden and that they are trying to help him get elected. That's a killer. The American people would not like that. So their policy of helping indirectly or directly Mr. Biden to get elected could backfire big time. Beyond that, if Mr. Trump gets re-elected, then the Islamic Republic can expect serious problems with the next administration of Mr. Trump. So I would stay away. If I was Iran, I would let the American people decide who they want to be their president. I will focus on domestic affairs. I will focus on finding a way, a solution to the U.S.-Iran relations to reduce tension during this very dangerous time. I think that's what Iran has to do. I also think Mr. Trump must not be reactive in this particular situation. That the radicals in Iran are going to talk, they are going to be very aggressive against Mr. Trump. But I think Mr. Trump must be patient, cool, and say what really is the truth and how he sees things developing in Iran and in U.S.-Iran relations, and act accordingly. he should really also listen to voice of reason here and there. I think to react to this radical talks and even actions on the side of Iran at this very dangerous time is not a wise thing to do. Mr. Trump must also make sure that his maximum pressure policy doesn't get out of hand. As I have said before, there comes a time that nations react. They just don't submit. They just don't say yes to pressure. Mr. Trump must understand that, and that particularly in the case of Iran, that's something to really understand, that Iranians sometimes are tough. They just don't simply respond to pressure. Now, this case with the extension of arms embargo in the UN, Mr. Trump must also be careful. That comes in October, just a month before the election. That's a very tough time. That's a very sensitive time. That very development could tip the balance in U.S.-Iran relations, God knows to which side. But it will indeed destroy the current balance that exists. Again, as you all know, I am for a policy of either war or peace. I dislike the no war, no peace policy on both sides, and this is status quo. But then again, war or peace needs to occur at the right time. Mr. Trump needs to be extremely careful. So should Iran. So should Iran. My advice for both of them is that they really need to cool down, to tune down the rhetoric and policy and actions to make sure that the tension doesn't increase beyond where it is, that it is reduced in the next 6 months before this important American election. In the meantime, Iran will have its own presidential election. And certainly that election will also go to the radicals. That's another development that we need to watch. But you never know. Radicals in Iran and Mr. Trump with his radical group in the US may indeed be the right match. Nixon opened the communist China, sort of. So again, let's give the time a chance. Be patient. Cool down. Reduce tension. And for the next 6 months, just be patient. And I'm talking about patient on both sides, not just the US, but Iran. If you cannot negotiate in the next 6 months, which most likely you cannot, at least control the situation and leave the door open for after this election, and perhaps after even the Iranian presidential election, when a radical president with a radical parliament will face an administration in this side that we don't know who, but an administration that indeed will have to deal with that radicalism. And they will. As I said over and over, in the past and now. Iran's problem with the United States is not partisan, it is bipartisan, and that's what Iran must understand. But unfortunately, in these days, for whatever reason, because Iran is so angry and upset at maximum pressure policy of the administration here, they're just not thinking in the right direction. I hope that they will. I will get back to you again with another talk on the same matter in a different way.